So we are going live. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Business of Speaking show. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and I am here with somebody I just met a couple of months ago, and I'm so happy to have Rachel joining me. How are you?
I am so great, Tim. How about you?
I'm doing wonderful. And for everybody that doesn't know or hasn't tuned into this show before, it really is not focusing on what these speakers talk about and share on stage as much as it is their journey to the stage and what they've learned along the way. So hopefully I get to ask a few questions maybe that Rachel hasn't answered before.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start. Tell us, Rachel, your story of how you got started in speaking.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, Tim, for a lot of us speakers out there, there is no speaking school, not typically. Nobody graduates high school and is like, I want to be a speaker. Maybe a few folks, but, like most folks, I fell into speaking. And if I look back, I think if I really own it, I knew I always wanted to be a speaker or a performer in some way. I really had always admired through high school a lot of bands. Honestly, I'm super into punk rock and a subgenre of punk rock, and it was very positive. And so between songs, these lead singers of bands would come on stage and they would say things like, this next song is about a time in my life where everyone around me was disappointing me, and I had to look inside myself and say, am I going to be like them, or am I going to be better than them? Am I going to let the area I grew up in define me, or am I going to let myself define me? And then they would go into these songs, and I just was so drawn to that. And fast forward, I just thought I loved this band, I love this music. And fast forward, went to college, thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Turns out I do not want to be a lawyer. And I fell into the events industry because I love to serve other people. And my superpower is sales. I love helping people sell more. I loved selling, and I loved making people happy. And long story short is I loved doing that for about a decade until burnout hit really bad in my career. I had achieved, success by every metric. My parents were proud of me. Yes, I'm the oldest child in a big family. So, Italian Catholic parents being proud of you was like, it was like better than being blessed by the Pope, basically. And, financial success was there. The title was there, the house, my hot husband. Yes, got to marry him. Like everything was great. And yet I got to the top of this mountain that I wanted and worked for, and I hated it. But I couldn't tell anybody I hated it because that would make everything a failure, me a failure, and this big question came up of, if not this, then what? And so long story short is I went through about 6 months of really intense burnout. Now, I like to say that burnout on the outside looks like the most massive success you've ever had. I was crushing sales goals. I was hiring more people than I ever had. I was crushing it. And on the inside, I was a wreck. And so what happened is I freaked out at work. I quit my job in just this massive flurry of expletives, and I maybe threw a laptop or two. It was not my best moment, Tim. Okay, I threw away my career, my income, reputation, all my friends, my identity, no big deal. And long story short is I walked straight into a therapist's office. I mentioned I'm Catholic. We don't really do therapy. So, I walked in and I said, hey, listen, I don't want to talk about my past. I don't want to talk about my family, my history, anything. I'm a workaholic. Work doesn't make me happy anymore, and I need help. And God bless my therapist. She didn't laugh. She didn't, tell me that we were definitely going to have to talk about that. She just listened. And every week for the next 6 or 8 months, I went to therapy and, worked a bunch of odd jobs to keep, my family afloat. And about 6 months in, she gave me a prompt. She said, I want you to think about the last time you were very joyful. And she defined joy as the happiness you have that isn't dependent on other people and other people's reactions. And I'm not going to lie, Tim, the burnout that I was experiencing had left me so confused and joyless that I'd struggled for weeks to try and think about it. And then it hit me. I was folding clothes. I'm here in my home studio in Charlotte right now. And I was folding clothes in my bedroom, and I remembered being 17 and listening to those musicians and that feeling of I can do anything and be anyone and just feeling really hopeful. And then it dawned on me, and I said, shit, I want to be a motivational speaker. And the rest is history. I said, okay, let's freaking do this. I knew that I was passionate about helping people sell more. And I also knew that I'd personally experienced burnout. And so that was about 3.5 years ago. And since then, I've built a training and coaching and keynoting company from the ground up.
So, and it just, I just need to go back because, I was brought up Catholic too. And I always thought therapy was going to confession.
Listen, I've been once. It was my first reconciliation. And I remember, Tim, Catholic to Catholic, I remember lying at my first reconciliation because I didn't know. I didn't know like what to tell the priest. Did I tell him the truth? Was he going to tell? It was just all this pressure. And, I'm retired Catholic. Sometimes I go for the Christmas music and the booze. That's what I like to say now. But I still keep the guilt. That's a nice parting gift,
I was going to say we could go on a whole nother tangent with that.
Yes, that's margarita convo. That's margarita
and speaking of margaritas, since we first met a couple months ago, I know your love for margaritas, so I have one right here.
I love it. That is hindered right there.
So, I'm really curious, like, once you had this moment of realization that you wanted to be a motivational speaker, how do you decide what the first step is? What is the first step? How do you go about that? And how did you, because I'm sure, this is one thing that I focus and deal a lot with is like, we see the top of the mountain, but we don't know which step to take to get to the top, and so I'm always curious, like, because I so appreciate the fact of everybody starts at that bottom of that mountain. And so, how do you deal with those first steps, I guess?
Well, I always like to say that, I did not climb Mount Everest. Allison Levine climbed Mount Everest. I admire her as a female speaker. She's an incredible keynoter anyway, but she climbed Mount Everest and she was like the first female squad leader to do it. She climbed Mount Everest. That's an incredible story. But I didn't do it, right? So that's not my keynoter story. I'm not a veteran, which is an incredible, the things that our armed forces and our ladies and gentlemen who do that, that's an incredible story. And I've never owned a company and sold it for billions or millions, right? So those are kind of, I think, maybe 3 of the things we typically would think about starting as speakers. And so, to your point, it is, so you see the top of the mountain, how do you get there? And to me, I think that it really comes from 2 things. It's what's your superpower? What is your tactical superpower that you have proven evidence to have done, that you know how to teach other people, and that provide tangible results? Like, for example, sales. Like, over the course of my career, just for small businesses, meaning under 100 people is what I consider a small business. It can be 1 person to 100. I've sold around $14 million personally. And I've helped other people, so those are team members that I've hired, sell around 20 million. And so, through training or leadership or mentorship. Now, am I going to be one of those folks that takes credit for all that 20 million? No, because I'm skeptical when folks are like, oh, I did that. Come on. I like that, but that's me personally. That's just my personality and that kind of stuff. I'm maybe rebellious in that way, but I know that my sales and selling ability is a superpower, and I can do it very, very well. Now, that's one side. The other side is, what is the thing that emotionally is true, that your experience has shown you, and that you want to be, I call it the ghost of Christmas future. because I love Charles Dickens and I love Christmas. So I just go with it. It's, where do you want to be the guiding light along the journey of life for people? And whether they choose to stop and listen to, and heed your words along the way, that's their choice. But if they choose to listen, will they be better for it? The answer would be yes. And that to me is where I really found, and I find my calling in the messages I build and in speaking businesses and the people that I individually coach, as speakers, and also too the people who come. Right, a lot of times people will ask you the same things. How'd you get started? How can I find my message? If you take your superpower and the change you wish to see in the world, the change you've experienced, the message that you wish you could give, the magic wand you could change, and you build messages around that. And better yet, if you can combine them, right? If you can find that beautiful, Venn diagram overlap, that's going to be, to me, the magic sauce and the special sauce of building programs. So for me, the messaging that I build, especially as I started in a modeling where it was coaching, training, keynoting, with my vision of the 5-year plan to eliminate coaching and to do training and keynoting, and then to exclusively do keynoting only, because that's my calling and preference in speaking, because speaking can happen on so many different levels. Keynoting is my preference and vision for my success and the way I want to deliver my message. But I mean, one-on-one speaking is transformative. We're doing it right now. I'll be changed after this.
I didn't even think of that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's something that I've always kind of gone through personally, and I'm sure other people, because I know I've talked to quite a few people, and I'm just wondering if you did this too. You were very successful in sales doing it for a company. Now you had to go out and sell yourself. Did you find any challenges or differences with that?
That is an interesting question. Yes and no. I would say yes. The biggest challenge that I personally found in it was I found a challenge in seeing my own pricing occasionally, which is where, by the way, to anyone listening on this, it doesn't matter if you listen to it live right now or 15 years in the future, when Tim is just massively successful and you're looking through these archives here thinking, wow, I can't believe this is free resource here. It's ask a friend. And ask multiple friends when you're creating your offerings, what would you pay for this? And can you share this with somebody that you think would benefit from it, and and ask them what they would pay for it? Because when you sell something, when you sell yourself as a commodity, what people will pay for it and what people actually pay for it prove the value, and I think a lot of times, especially, and I'll say this, especially as creative entrepreneurs, which speakers often are, we don't sometimes think of ourselves as creatives, but we are. And also too, as women, there's this massive undervaluing that happens. And, the world somehow values accountants massively, and creatives that are just creating these beautiful, intangible and sometimes tangible things, very lowly. And there's no real matrix for that. So phone a friend, and I mean, Tim, you and I are resources. Email us. I would give somebody feedback. Would you?
Absolutely.
If you email us, we'll give you feedback and we'll give it to you straight, and we'll ask questions to help. And, we've seen a lot of pricing in our day and we know the struggle. So get outside of your own head and ask. So yes, but I will say this, I didn't struggle with selling myself because I am a zealot for myself. And I know that if people do not hire me, they're going to hire somebody else. And you know how many bad speakers there are in the world, Tim? We've seen them. We've heard them. They are like a sad continental breakfast that is sat out. Okay. They've said things that have been tired. They've done things. It is the averageness of speaking that I'm competing with a lot of the time. And that's not to insult others. I would never name names, But when I think about the energy I bring, the professionalism, when I think about the way people stand in line to talk to me afterwards, the way people openly cry when they hear some of my messaging, the way people hug me and tell me, you were so accessible. Like they tell me stories about their family or the way that they feel seen, that I know that if not me, then someone else, and no one is going to love that audience like I'm going to love that audience. And no one's going to give somebody that 5-star service. I have a background in events, so I know what meeting planners like. Like I am a zealot. And so I feel so passionate about that. And I think that that really does come through. And I rely on this thing, and I encourage anyone out there listening. It's this phrase, competence builds confidence. If you want to be more confident in selling yourself, find the competencies that you need to increase. You don't feel confident because you're not sure about your competitors. Research them. Any speaker that emails me and wants to get on a Zoom call, great. We need better speakers. We need more diversity. We need more women. We need more Black and Indigenous and people of color on stage. I call for it in my closings. I say, you think you could do a better job than me? Good. Join me. We need more women and people of color. And it is those kinds of things that I really do encourage you, because if you don't think you're the expert and you're the best for the job, then why would your clients think that? And that's going to be one of the hardest things I think people do struggle with when it comes to selling themselves, is they don't feel like they're the expert. And it's your job to figure out where you need to improve and go seek that education. Go to YouTube University, and ask, what's the worst thing that happens? Somebody ignores your email. Okay, no problem.
So, I know you mentioned early on when you had your kind of your 5-year plan of, starting with the coaching, the consulting, and the speaking, the keynotes, and then you wanted to go more into just the workshops and the keynotes, and then eventually the keynotes. You were just talking about that kind of emotional connection and that you build with people when you're up on stage and during and after. I'm curious, has that played a role in how it's changed maybe the course of the business since you first set out to start it, or has it just kind of re-emphasized what you wanted to do?
It's a great question. I think it's re-emphasized, to be honest. I think that one thing that I've realized is the more I get on stage in front of larger crowds, in front of larger audiences, what happens is that my honesty and my messages, and just my existence, honestly, as a plus size woman on stage, which honestly is a rarity in keynoting, it just is. It's, I think, a little bit of shock and awe, and people are responding in greater amounts. And it's one of those things where I see that by existing and showing up and being vulnerable, one of the things I do talk about in a lot of my keynotes is weight. And I play with it. I play with it humorly. And also, too, I derive a lot of power from it. I like to take up space. And I like to share a message that a perceived negative by some is a very strong positive for others. And I think a lot of times when you're a speaker, and Tim, I know you'll agree with me on this, when you're a speaker and you're able to do something and share your message, and people feel emboldened to share their message with you, and you realize this domino effect is just getting bigger. I mean, I think about Queen, don't stop me now, I'm having a good time. Now I'm looking to, arenas. Let's freaking go big with this thing. So it's been awesome. And I'm still on the 5-year plan. I'm in year 3.5 right now. And, COVID's got me a little bit off track, but here's the thing, the 5-year plan's still in place. It's not if I get there, it's just a matter of when. And I think this, same as for you. That's what's fun about really the business of speaking. And I love that you've started this, because there's so many different paths and available options. But one of the great things about speaking is we all have those distinct voices, and you never know when your voice really is going to be the one that clicks for somebody, and the transformation that's possible, that impact of the domino effect, it's limitless,
So have you had any moments, I mean, outside of maybe what we're going through with COVID now, early on, especially, that you just kind of felt like that, there was that, you know, no answer to this response, no follow up, I didn't get this gig. And did you ever have those moments of feeling like, man, maybe this isn't going the way I thought it was going to go?
Yeah, let me think on that. I will tell you, Tim, I am blessed with a pretty bad memory for failure. I really cling to the positives pretty quickly, and I just move right on from the failures. I'm like, what did this teach me? Great, let's move on. But I will say one of the things that I did really early on was from my previous corporate or small business background in events. One of the things I did is when I quit my job, I mentioned I ruined my reputation, but when I got my act together, I figured out, I had the moment and I was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Got my stuff together. What I started to do is I started to reach out to the people in the associations I was members of and say, hey, listen, privately, this is what I'm doing, and I'd like your feedback and I'd like your support. And I asked my association chapters to hire me, and for very little money. I mean, the first paying gig was in Silicon Valley. It was out of Fairmont, so it's beautiful. Shout out to Kevin Dennis. He was the first person to ever pay me money. He paid me travel, a hotel, and $250 to speak. And it was validation. It was validation that the business was real, that somebody had paid me money. And I'll never forget him. And I'll always be thankful to him for that. But when it comes to feeling a little discouraged, I will tell you, as I started to raise my rates, I'm a big person that, as the more competent I got, the more confident I got, and then I would strategically raise them. And as I started hitting that ceiling, which was probably in that $3,000 range, it was discouraging. My closing rates, spoiler alert, I thought I was great at closing rates at 95%. No, that's way too high, guys. We should not be closing at 95%. It should be around 50%. I mean, and even then, maybe it's a little too high. And that was tough. And I started to think, well, what is it? And the spoiler is it's the confidence. And it really is. It's being able to utilize your referrals. It's being able to make sure that you are, I'm not a sell from the stage person. Personally, I just am allergic to folks that do a lot of that stuff. I respect the hustle. I don't judge others for doing it, but I just don't prefer it. And at the end of the day, what I started to realize was if I feel weird, if I've got a problem asking for $500 or $7,500 or $9,500, then my client's going to feel weird paying it, right? No wonder I've got this mental block. And so there was a moment where I had definitely a dry spell, and I had to work on it internally, and start to say, okay, well, what's the block here? And I worked on my performance. I worked on my website. I worked on showing up, as the professional that I was. Every time before a call, now, of course, we're doing Zoom way more, but every time before a phone call, I would get dressed as if it was an in-person meeting, no more, hanging out on the couch or being in yoga pants, and I do love some yoga pants. But that was really helpful from a mindset perspective. It was less so the clients, because here's the thing, and this is something that I think about all the time, Tim. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, I mean, government contractors in the US make hundreds of millions of dollars a month, maybe thousands. I mean, they might make billions. I don't even want to know, right? So there's abundance of money in the world. Why not me? I'm just asking for a tiny little piece of that money. And I think that that's true, right? Which is why I don't compete with other speakers. There's so much more to go around. Like, heck yeah, let's all get some money. Let's freaking go. but it was me that I was competing with. And the sooner, whenever I catch myself, even now, as I am, I'm not the cheapest out there, but I'm definitely not the most expensive. When I catch myself in a little bit of a selling slump, it is never my clients. If they don't see my value, if they're not paying that price, that one's on me. Either that or they're not my client. And that's okay too.
Oh wow, I can't believe our time is just about up. But before we go, can you just answer one last question? If you were to give somebody just getting involved in speaking one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh gosh, one piece of advice, one piece of advice. Um, you know what? There's no rules. There's no rules. When I first got into speaking, I just named my talks whatever I wanted. I said whatever I wanted. I spoke however I wanted. I wore whatever I wanted. It served me well. And I think that success is truly as simple as being yourself. And that I could not stress it enough that anyone who tells you that there are rules about how you speak or anything like that, they're probably selling you something. To be quite honest, like, and learn from others for sure, but no rules. Go with your heart. Like, to me, and this is probably for life, you know best for you. You just have to be quiet enough and confident enough to listen to yourself, because nobody knows you or what you want like you.
Oh, well, I love that piece of advice. And with that, can you just tell everybody where they can find you, how they can connect with you?
Yeah, totally. So I'm everywhere on social media, LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. So I'm Rachel Sheerin. Instagram, Rachel.Sheerin. I do have a podcast. It's named after my most popular keynote. It is called F This S. That's right, you heard me. F This S. My keynote is entitled F This S, Burnout and Coming Back to Work You Love. It's also part of my TEDx talk, which you can find on TED.com, which is called How to Burn Out and Be Successful. And then you can drop me a line. My email is hi@rachelsheerin.com. I've got a newsletter and stuff like that. You can drop me an email. I'd love to see a picture of your very cute dog. I'll send you back a picture of mine, or we can meet up for margaritas, margaritas. I'm an open book, so let me know.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And for everybody watching, just so you know, I'm going to be stopping the broadcast here on YouTube in just a second, but Rachel's going to stay on with me, and she agreed to let me ask her one additional question that we will only be sending out to our email subscribers. So if you are interested in what we're talking about here, please head over to speaking.business and join our community, sign up for our email list, and you will be receiving this exclusive content that we record right after we go off air.